The 1980s had been a hallmark for women elected officials. So writes Dr. Judith Lynch in the closing of her fifth installment and in the opening of her sixth installment in her series examining the history of women elected in Erie County in the women's movements. In past conversations, we've covered the 1920s to the 1970s and the time in between. In our last discussion, we turned our attention finally to the 80s, where we learned about the accomplishments of Joyce Savacchio, Barbara Pope Mack, and Tracy Seifert. And we saw our guest for this program and author of this series, Dr. Judith Lynch, head from Erie County Council to Erie County Executive. Today, we're going to take a look at the glass ceiling broken in the Erie County courts as we focus on one election in 1989. Hello and welcome to the Jefferson Educational Society's digital programming. I'm Ben Spagan and I'm the Vice President at the Jefferson and am a contributing editor at the Erie Reader. And in this conversation, the sixth part of Dr. Lynch's series, we'll take a look again at the 1980s. In 1989, we're going to take a look at the court system in Erie County. Joining me for this conversation is JES Scholar in Residence, Dr. Judith Lynch, who's been writing about the history of Erie County's elected women, and in her writings are available for free download on our website, jeserie.org. A bit about Dr. Lynch before we get started with today's program. And folks, a friendly reminder, if you've missed parts 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or any one of those, you can still tune into today's conversation. You're not going to be out of the loop. We'll cover some of the things to get us caught up, but this particular conversation will focus on 1989. You can join us for this and just still learn just as much. Now about Dr. Lynch, she started her time at the JES as the first chair of the think tank's board of trustees. She remains on that board today. She served as the inaugural director of the Jefferson Civic Leadership Academy in 2015 and was named the Jefferson's Decadian Scholar in 2018. Amongst her many accomplishments, she spent time in academia, serving as an associate professor of political science and history at Mercyhurst University, and prior taught at Allegheny College, where she was also a part of the Civic Engagement Institute there. She was a 5-term county executive in Erie, some of which we covered in the last installment. But before that, she was the first woman elected to Erie County's new county council government. And she was instrumental in drafting Erie County's home rule charter. Dr. Lynch also has worked, if that was not enough, has also worked as an analyst for the CIA and taught 13 years at Villa Marie High School. She received her doctorate with distinction in political science in 2001 from the University of Pittsburgh and her master's degree in social studies from Gannon University. Her undergraduate, a bachelor's in history and political science, is from George Washington University. Of course, for those looking to read any one of these installments, in the newly freshly published 6th installment, or just get refreshed on them as we have this conversation, head over to our website, jeserie.org. You'll also find the videos to stream on demand where Dr. Lynch and I discuss parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if you are just joining us for the first time, do rest assured you won't be lost if you haven't gotten to those writings or videos just yet. Now, since this program is first airing live on the JES Facebook page, we'll work our way through as many questions from you, the viewers, as we can as we host this event. If you have a question, just leave it in the comment section below. We'll get it right from there. If you are watching or listening to a later broadcast of this event, still engage us in that dialogue. Send your questions, your comments, and be a part of our conversation here. Dr. Lynch and I will get those. And of course, for more information about both upcoming and past Jefferson Educational Society programs and publications, visit that website, jeserie.org, and find us on all the social platforms. Be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Dr. Judith Lynch, thanks for coming back for part 6. Thanks for writing part 6, and thanks for being here today.
Well, it's my great honor, and thank you very much for having me, Ben.
So I say it, and I might sound like a broken record, Judy, but I got to thank you for all you're doing here because, really this series, I'm learning a lot. I know our viewers are, our listeners are as well. You're unpacking stuff we just had not put together before, and you're really making sure that, our history is told and studied in full. So a big thank you again for doing this work and for being here for this conversation. In the last installment, we were talking about the 1980s. For those who may have missed it or might need a refresher, recap some of the major highlights that we covered there in the election. I mentioned some of those names in the intro, but the early 80s, let's talk about that before we get to that key year, 1989.
Well, in the 1980s, more women were elected. to office than at any time in the history of Erie County. So it was quite a decade. And it ended in 1989, where we really had the Times herald it as the year 1989 as the year of the woman. But even before that, you had people who were elected. Judy Lynch, myself, I was elected as county executive, but person that we call Mayor Savacchio was first elected to city council. Barbara Pogue-Mack was elected to county council. So these are a few of the women who really took office during that period of time. I want to stress a caveat to our listeners, and that is what I have done in this kind of piece, this investigation, is look at only those who have been elected to countywide positions or citywide positions, or in terms of county council districts. There's a whole other story out there. There's a story that needs to be told about township supervisors, about borough managers and borough councilmen, about people who have contributed as tax collectors. And so there's much more to this story, and hopefully we can put it all together at some point in the future.
I was just going to say, Dr. Lynch, I know just the person to work on that once you're done with the city part and the county part. And this is, I'm so glad you noted that, because this is laying out such a critical foundation to really build this series out from. And it's just as important to look at municipal government as it is to look at state government, because we see momentum happening there as well. So I'm so grateful for you pointing that out. Let's take a look at that year, 1989. The Erie Daily Times, as you said, heralded it, the year of the women. Thanks to you in this new installment, we get a chance to see more glass ceilings being shattered. And as you put it, somebody broke into a men-only universe who became Erie County's first elected judge on the Erie County Court of Common Pleas. That is Stephanie Dimitrovich. You introduce us to her in your writing, which I want to encourage people to go and read. It's available now for free download on our website, jeserie.org. And of course, we send out emails weekly with these installments right into your inbox, where people can also get those. If you're interested in that, happy to add you to those lists. You mentioned, you introduce your readers, us, to her through an editorial written by Ed Welligis for the Erie Daily Times on Wednesday, November 8th, after Tuesday's election. You note that he writes that it was the biggest surprise at all. That's a quote, the biggest surprise of all. What made this such a big surprise?
Well, first of all, Stephanie Dimitrovich was not well known. She was not a person that could be found in political circles or even in maybe the legal community. She worked for Erie County government. She was a solicitor in Erie County, but she was not well known among the people generally in Erie County. She was not from a family that had its deep roots in Erie County. So she came into this political sphere as somebody that you would not expect.
And you note in that piece that she won narrowly. That wasn't to be
That's
unexpected
right.
if she did
By
win.
700 votes. By 700 votes.
And we've talked about that in past series, these slim, often razor thin margins. And so, you know, I'm always reminded when somebody tells me, you know, they think their vote does not count or does not matter. We're coming upon various elections we can point to say every single vote, of course, counts, and every vote should be counted that's legally cast. We know that. One of the things that you cover, again, drawing from Ed Welligis here, you drop in a quote from him that says, "One factor was her amazingly warm personality." Was Welligis's read right? What did it mean in terms of giving credit to her win on her personality?
He was absolutely correct. Okay. Now remember, I was running at the same time. I was very, very often in the same circles because we travel to all the ethnic clubs, to all of the affairs that were being held in Erie County. And I would just in awe watch Stephanie Dimitrovich. She danced every dance. She was just spontaneous in her exuberation. She talked to every single person in the room. She was effervescent. She was a person that you would be immediately drawn to. And I really think that, and there must be people in our listening audience that can remember this too. There never was, in my opinion, a better campaigner than Stephanie Dimitrovich.
And I think that's high praise coming from you. And so we've talked about that she was, I think maybe, more delicately put, a political newcomer. I think maybe more accurately unknown in the political arena. And yet she broke through. Welledge's credits her personality. You agree with that, that amazingly warm personality, but you also note she's quite accomplished at the age of 35, despite being that outsider, that newcomer, that unknown. Tell us a bit about what she had accomplished at the time she runs for this office, which is the age of 35.
One of the most significant accomplishments, in my opinion, is she graduated summa cum laude from Carlow University. That's quite an accomplishment. And in addition to that, all during her career as a judge, she has continued to educate herself. She has other doctorates, and she, of course, from Carlow, she went on to Duquesne University. She got her legal degree, but she has, in addition to that, doctorates and masters, about 3 masters. She is a highly educated woman, probably one of the most educated women that we have in Erie County, if you look at her credentials.
And you cover that so well in the piece, now available at jeserie.org. And so despite the academic prowess, despite the warm personality, still it's hard to ignore that this was a long shot, a very long shot for her to win, given her outsider nature, her name recognition in the political arena, yet she does it. We've talked about before, Dr. Lynch, long shots and newcomers, yourself having been one, a newcomer to politics, and we see people breaking through those glass ceilings. And this is the first time we have that happen, the Erie County court system. What made that different? If I can push it just a little bit more of her breakthrough, what made this different? Just how long of a long shot was this for her to accomplish the victory for this seat?
Well, part of that analysis, when you look at why was it a long shot, you have to look at her opponents. Because in the Democratic primary, her opponent was Barry Drew. Now, Barry Drew comes from a family that is highly known in the Erie area. He was the solicitor for the city of Erie. So he had long experience, and his name had often been in the news, and anybody who knew Barry Drew knew that he was an exemplary person. Of course, unfortunately, he has passed away, and we miss him dearly, but he was a tremendous, not only person, but a good campaigner. So she was opposed to Barry Drew in the Democratic primary. But in the Republican primary,
it didn't get any easier.
Nobody, no political official would ever have chosen to run against her political opponent. That was John Barber. There's probably no family in the Erie area has been more highly kind of elevated in the political realm as well as in the charitable realm as the Barber family. And this is John Barber, the oldest of the Barber sons. And he was her opponent during the general election.
And so that makes it a long, long shot in terms of what she's got to overcome, not only in the primary.
Impossibility.
But yet she does. And you note a couple of key things that I want to touch upon that are specific to, one that is specific to when you're running for judge, and then one that, may favor anyone when you're running for an office and you find your name on the ballot. It's sometimes not just, is it on there, but where is it on there? So Judy, talk to us about the ballot draw and the position for Dimitrovich, how that benefited her or may have benefited her, and then cross-filing. We can't talk about a court race without talking about the ability to cross-file when it comes to running.
Well, one of the things about the American a judicial system, and this is so important, particularly because it pertains to where we are today. The American judicial system is not supposed to be political in the sense of being party oriented. And so there are certain parts of the political process that are tuned in order to make it as much as possible a non-political process. Now, Pennsylvania is one of the states in the United States that has elected judges. Many states choose to have their judges appointed. And as you know, the federal court is all appointed, so they don't run for office. But in Pennsylvania, judges run for office. And so it means that the state then is construing it in such a way that it kind of diminishes the political nature of this effort to take the position of judge in an election. And one of the things that has been done in Pennsylvania is to allow anybody in a judicial race, that's district justices too, to cross file. So they file as a Democrat, they file as a Republican, and so they are on both ballots in the primary. They are not really heralding themselves or picturing themselves or making an imprint as a Republican or a Democrat. They are supposed to be nonpartisan, so they file on both parties, Democrat and the Republican. Now, Stephanie filed as a Democrat. Her opponent was Barry Drew. And she filed, of course, as a Republican. Her opponent was John Barber.
And such an important thing to note, not all states do this the same way. Some appoint, some elect, and in Pennsylvania, we elect our judges, and they run for terms, and we decide whether or not to appoint them to a bench, we the people. But we see that being such an interesting distinction of being able to cross-file for both parties. The other thing that I wanted to push a little bit on, Judy, if I can, is that top ballot position. We find that Stephanie Dimitrovich gets that. What does that mean when it comes to the overall process of, is it better to get the top position? Is it better to get the bottom position? Better to be in the middle? What does the draw mean?
Well, the way we vote over time has changed, and you know, the paper ballots, and I even had to look with the paper ballots we were given in this election to search for names. But on a machine, which is how we used to vote, it was even more problematic. So if you were at the top of the ballot, it's more likely because people were in a hurry. They had a very busy schedule. They had to get in and out. And so they would look at the top, and if it wasn't very consequential for them, they would choose the person at the top of the ballot. So what was interesting, when the ballot positions were to be chosen, and Stephanie had a young woman who was there to choose her ballot positions on the Republican ballot and on the Democratic ballot. And then there was a police officer who chose John Barber's position on the ballot for, and so what happened was, and I think that I'm getting this confused, it was Barry Drew. Barry Drew Drew had the last position on the ballot, the person that drew for him. So he got the last position on the ballot for the judicial candidates. Stephanie, the person that drew for her on both the Republican side and on the Democratic side, got the first ballot position, where Barry Drew had the last position.
And we see that being a favorable position, or something candidates want to get. And that's, with the process, voting on machines, I remember those. Sometimes people don't always click over to the next page. Even just simply being on the next screen can be more challenging. Same for paper ballot. Being on the back of a ballot might be more challenging. So placement does have a factor in that. Another factor in elections, and you pointed out in your piece, and they're still relevant today, newspaper endorsements. We see that still being relevant today for the first time in its storied career, the USA Today endorsed a candidate in the 2020 presidential election. Scientific America magazine had never endorsed a candidate before and endorsed. So we still look at these as important indicators when media outlets are communicating to their readers their endorsement of a candidate. What did the endorsements mean in this particular election? Let's look locally with the newspapers there, Judy.
Well, first of all, I'm going to correct a mistake that I made in the written document that I gave to you. Stephanie did not receive the endorsement of the Times News. John Barber received in the general election. Stephanie did not receive the endorsement. John Barber received the endorsement of the Times News for the position of Judge of the Court of Common Pleas. Endorsements are very important. Particularly for a position like judge, it could be very high on your agenda as thinking of its importance, but for most people, it's a down ballot position. They're looking at some other position like mayor or a council person or somebody else that there might be connected with. And so usually judges are kind of a second thought, but an endorsed person for a judge would be very important. And in this case, Ed Welligis, in his recount of the 1989 election, certainly endorses Stephanie. I mean, he speaks of her in glowing terms. However, the Times, in their endorsement before the election, endorsed John Barber. This would be the November election. By that time, Stephanie had already won the primary. She had beat Barry Drew. Now she was in the general election, and her opponent was John Barber, and the paper endorsed John Barber.
And yet we see, despite that endorsement, Stephanie Dimitrovich emerging victorious. What do you chalk her victory up to? Because endorsements are not nothing. They do mean something, and a lot of folks are turning to them for guidance who may not be as plugged into a race as they could have been, and they trust upon an editorial board to make decisions. So what do you chalk her victory up to? How did she overcome that?
Well, I really believe that it was her campaign activities. She was everywhere. She was warm. She was gracious. She entered into all of the conversations. And as I said before, she was on the dance floor. She certainly was somebody that if you walked into a room, your eyes would immediately be drawn to her. And she was in conversation with as many people as she could be. So she was an excellent, excellent campaigner. I say that was number one for the reason why she was elected. Now, I know that you might be referring to the fact that she was declared the Woman of the Year, and that came in October. The election is November, and at the end of October, the women's organization declared her as the Woman of the Year. And in doing that, they gave a bio of Stephanie Dimitrovich. They heralded her accomplishments, but also what they stressed was her charitable activities and how many organizations she had been a part of and had been an assistant to whatever their goals and their charitable kind of reasons for existence were. So she was, in the opinion of women, not only a wonderful candidate, but excellent kind of representative of what a woman should be.
One of the things I appreciate about these writings, which folks can download for free on the Jefferson's website, jeserie.org. One of the things I appreciate, Dr. Lynch, is the images you work to find to include in these as well. And that makes them such a rounded out experience. We're reading about it, and we're also seeing photos from the Times. We're seeing advertisements of the Times. One of the images that you feature has a headline on that. If he wanted the information, all he had to do was ask, and it was ask all in capital letters there. And it's an image that really pops out. Tell us a little bit about what that was.
Well, this is concerns the general election in November, and the Barber organization's main complaint what their accusation was against Stephanie Dimitrovich is she did not have enough legal experience. She had not argued in front of appellate courts or the Supreme Court, and that her credentials were not sufficient for her to be admitted to the bar or the Court of Common Pleas. What this advertisement does is it kind of destroys that. It shows exactly the cases in which she was a party to and which were argued before appellate courts. One case where it went before the Supreme Court. In addition to that, she gives her credentials too as a person who is capable, who is qualified to be a judge of the Court of Common Pleas. This is an aside, and nobody has to agree with me, but it is interesting to me that for a woman, what do they do? Oh, well, she's not qualified. Okay.
And Judy, I think that's an aside I'll push you to explore a little bit more. What do you mean by that? That's an attack on women? What do you mean there?
Well, and I'm not saying John Barber is somebody I have great respect for, and the people that supported him and the Barber family, there couldn't be a better, greater family. We should all be proud of what the Barbers have contributed to Erie, beside they're Irish, right?
And Judy,
Okay.
you're Irish, so we know
So
that.
I'm not criticizing John Barber, but it seems to me if it is just a matter of having a man in a position as an opponent to a woman, and the man says, well, she's not qualified. This is a men's world. This is where men have been universal. They have always ruled this world. She's not qualified, you know, without saying it, without saying anything about her gender. They stress the qualifications.
And what this reminds me of, Judy, and thank you. That's I wanted to push you a little bit there, because it reminds me, and in no way am I saying this is what the Barber campaign had done in this instance, but what it reminds me of in general is that when we see a man who is a candidate speaking forcefully, we often hear critics and pundits say he's showing strength. When we hear a woman speaking forcefully, unfortunately, we hear words like shrill.
Sure.
And that's,
Absolutely.
and so it shows the additional challenge, especially these glass ceiling breakers that have to go through when they're firsts, that they're being held. I think it's fair to say they're being held to a different standard. They're being looked at with a more cautious eye, more scrutiny, because simply that had never been done before, and so we look at them differently. And so I think that's what I think you're hinting at with that, and that's what I wanted to make sure you and I are hearing the same thing and thinking the same thing when you say that. So she wins, and she wins a narrow margin. Surprises
700
everyone.
votes.
700 votes. And in 1990, on January 3rd, she's being sworn in. You
Yes.
write that her victory, her election victory, was a victory for women. And you note that at the time she had acknowledged that she had opened doors for other female judges. That's what she says. And she adds, I'm happy to be a woman, a mother, and a wife, and now a judge. We heard something pretty similar to that recently with Kamala Harris being the first woman vice president and first vice president who is a person of color. When you see the image, and I think you showed us on the last installment the picture that had Mayor Savacchio and then all the mayors prior, and just what a startling image that is to see the overwhelmingness of white guys and something different. Unpack that for us when you talk about that being a victory for all women, and that she's opening the door for other female judges.
Okay, now that's Stephanie. Let me just take you to the current period of time. So 2 days ago, about 2 days ago, Channel 24 said, we want to come and interview me, about Kamala Harris. And at that time, I had a group of Girl Scouts here from Mill Creek schools who were raking the leaves as part of a civic project, okay? And this was outdoors, so the troop leaders were being very inventive. How do we keep them occupied, plus we want them to do things for other people. So I had about 8 Girl Scouts here, the troop leaders were here, and the Channel 24 came. And I said, I want you to look. I want you to see all of these girls. That means the success of Kamala Harris means that each one of these girls, each one of these Girl Scouts can dream and can have whatever their pursuits take them. Any position, anything, the door is completely open. This is the first vice president of the United States that has been a woman. She has certainly opened the doors. Now for Stephanie, she was the first woman who became a judge of the Court of Common Pleas. And if you look, we have histories of the judges of Erie County, and it's page after page of men, 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 men. It's not until you get to 1989, and actually she was sworn in 1990, until you get to 1990, that you see a woman on the bench of the Court of Common Pleas of Erie County. So what a tremendous accomplishment, and it has opened the doors. And since then, we have Elizabeth Kelly, who is currently a judge, and she won in 1999, and she sits on the bench in Erie County in the Court of Common Pleas, and she was joined by Erin Connolly. And Erin Connolly was just successful in her election for retention, as Stephanie was.
And I think that's such an important note to point out. And I thank you for sharing the Girl Scout story. And I think that captures it. The idea that these young girls now have a model. They see that someone else can do it. They can dream to be that too. Dr. Lynch, do you think that in some way is important for little boys and for men too, to see that women can do this and acknowledge that it's not a male-dominated universe when it comes to these offices?
Nor is it a female-dominated universe, okay? It is open to all, and that's what's so important. So I think young boys and men have to be counseled and also shown that the door is open, that they can do anything that they aspire to, as long as they work hard and they achieve all of the things that are necessary in order for them to get there. That the door is not closed because they happen to be Black, or they happen to be female, or perhaps happen to be male.
That's such a good point. And it really does open that and broaden that good people, qualified people can run for office, people who can gather an electorate around them and have them vote them in and become part of that process. And here we are talking about Stephanie Dimitrovich, the glass ceiling shatterer of 1989, going onto the court system. She's been reelected. So one of the things we follow here in this series is, at times we see there's a lack of representation, and at times we wonder what these things mean. She was reelected, and she served 30 years on the court. It's a reminder, though, that this is a little bit different. We talked about cross filings earlier for court appointed positions. This isn't a 4-year election. This isn't a 2-year election. We're looking at 10 years. For those who might be reaching for their local civics textbooks to reacquaint themselves with this, briefly explain what that means to us, Dr. Lynch, and how we elect judges and decide on retention.
Okay, retention is the critical element, that name, because voters then have only one name on the ballot. They do not have, that person does not have an opponent. And voters are asked whether they want to retain that judge for a period of 10 years. So the retention period is a very extensive one. And again, the purpose here was to take the judiciary out of the political arena and to make it so that it didn't matter whether you were a Republican or a Democrat. It was all about the law and applying the law universally in a way in which you treated every person as an individual.
One of the things that I mentioned early, and I've been thanking you for it, each one of these installments, every time you write one and we have a chance to talk about it, you and I here, Judy, I thank you for the work you're doing. And I always point out, one of the things I value the most here is you're helping us learn our history in full and study our history in full. I appreciate that really about your reporting, Dr. Lynch, that you tell the stories in their full. And we find at the end of this installment that Judge Dimitrovich's tenure on bench has been not without controversy. Tell us a little bit about this.
It has been problematic. Now, I don't mean universally every day, but she has had tremendous opposition for various reasons. Now, the one in which she is right now involved in is with Commonwealth Court. And the reason is that the president judge has brought a complaint against her. It went to Commonwealth Court, and the complaint was that she had not been a kind of a neutral party, and she had, as a judge, signed papers for her son, who was an attorney for LECOM. Now, what these papers were is LECOM asking the court to give a person that LECOM has hired or will hire the capability of being a policeman, which means that you can arrest, that you can carry arms, that you can do all of the things that policemen are allowed. So in order to get that allowance, then the court has to give it to you. Well, her son, the attorney for LECOM, brought those papers to the Court of Common Pleas, and Judge Dimitrovich then signed them. And of course, the president judge is alleging that was improper, and he has filed a complaint in Commonwealth Court. So we don't know what the situation will be and how it will be finally resolved. And there have been other instances where Stephanie's behavior on the court has been criticized. And so as a result of that, she has had a mentor, and she's done extra things that a judge is not required to do, but in order to satisfy any complaints that against her demeanor as a judge.
And thank you for that. And we aim to shine a light here, and we're looking to see everything. And we've talked about it in past episodes that sometimes when we see folks get into a near celebrity status, that we start making icons, or we start thinking about them differently. But politicians are people, and people are imperfect, and we have to see their full stories along the path as we're studying this. But that in no way discredits her accomplishment, breaking through that ceiling and creating a pathway for other women to follow her onto the bench. No?
Yes, absolutely. Judge Kelly and Judge Connolly should understand that one of the reasons, and I'm sure that they're more than qualified, and their personalities are just awesome, and their capabilities are certainly tremendous, and they're on those seats because of all of what they offer to the residents and to the citizens of Erie County. However, it was a man's club. It was all men. And you had to break that glass ceiling, and it was Stephanie Dimitrovich that did that. And she did it by her outstanding campaign kind of strategy and tactics.
Going first is not easy, and this is probably a thin and probably a poor analogy, but as an avid outdoors person and hiker, I know it's much easier to hike on a trail that has been blazed versus one that has not. If somebody's gone before you and cleared a path, it is different than going it alone the first time where it's not marked. What a wonderful conversation to take a look at the 1980s as we've continued our look at elected Erie County women. I know there's more to come in the pipeline. Dr. Lynch, can you give us a sneak peek of what we might be looking at next?
Well, of course, we're talking about 1989. This is the election of 1989. And these are officials that win that election and are sworn in 1990. And one of the most significant, of course, is Joyce Savacchio, and she becomes a mayor of the city of Erie.
It was so wonderful to talk about Joyce Savacchio and her accomplishments on Erie City Council, being a glass ceiling shatterer there. Can't wait to hear about how she did as mayor so that we can share that conversation with our audience here. Dr. Judith Lynch, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise and firsthand experience, and for taking the time, energy, and effort to share them with us here in this conversation.
Well, I'm delighted to do that. I'm hoping that it shines a light on the importance of women and their efforts to become accepted as an equal part of the society.
Absolutely. And here we are doing that 100 years after the passing of the 19th Amendment, in which women gained the federal right to vote. That can seem like a long time. To me, it seems like a short time. It's not long enough. But here we are talking about the history that's been made since then onward, looking at Erie County, Pennsylvania, and taking a look at the 1990s next as we gather here weekly Wednesdays at noon for these discussions with Dr. Judith Lynch, scholar in residence at the Jefferson Educational Society. Tune into her writings. You can find more on those on our website, jeserie.org. You can also sign up for email alerts where we send you out the piece. You can read it right in your inbox. But if you head to that website, you'll also find other programs featuring Dr. Lynch, other writings from other contributors we've had to the Jefferson, worth your time, free to download. Those videos are free and available to stream on demand whenever you'd like them. And of course, we've got more information about upcoming Jefferson Educational Society programs. And of course, a big thanks to all of you for tuning in, watching these programs, listening to these programs, being a part of our conversation. We always welcome your comments and feedbacks. We'll be on the lookout for that. And of course, be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you'll find all of our content there. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Spag, and be safe, be sound, and thanks for listening and learning with us.